Hello and welcome everybody to this, the penultimate of our solution series as part of the WorkEqual campaign and conference 2020. I have to say, as this series has unfolded, I've learned so much. We have heard from the most amazing international speakers on their experiences, and as ever with WorkEqual, this is focused on solutions and on what we can all implement in Ireland for a better society and a better economy, and to really bring forward the conversation of gender equality. And it is happening. We have had amazing attendees, very powerful influencers in this conversation, and a huge thanks to Permanent TSB and to Solus, who are our 3-year conference partners, showing their absolute commitment to this campaign and the conversation. So thank you so much, and huge thanks to everybody at Dress for Success, who are the launch pad from which WorkEqual was born, and of course to Alice PR, without whom none of this could have been possible. Our speakers are indeed amazing. Our MC is amazing. I can't wait for you to get involved. But I would love to just, for those of you who haven't been involved in the campaign before or haven't been to the conference sessions before, I just want to give you a little overview of what we're going to do. And we basically focused the solution series on the 5 pillars that were identified at last year's conference as priority pillars to move forward the conversation around gender equality. And this today's session is around the very topical issue of caring duties, something that we've looked at through a new lens, both in a domestic environment and in an employee environment during COVID. So let's have a little look at the recommendations that came up from last year's conference, where we took multiple stakeholders in this conversation and asked them all to work together to decide what were the key areas. So firstly, target-led employment initiatives in sectors where women are underrepresented, state-backed assurance mark for organizations that demonstrate and commit to gender. I think that's a really, really key one for us, because more and more we're looking at consumer power and how this really matters. And in a world where by far and away above 80% of all consumer purchases are made by women, we wanted to tell that story to the women who are actually putting their hands in their pockets. Access to credit and bond systems for female entrepreneurs. And when you look at Blackwater Investments, will now only invest in high potential startups that have 2 female directors or more on their executive teams. That's a real rubber stamp for what this means. Mentoring and sponsorship programs for women at all stages of their career. And this has really been shown to be the fuel to drive women forward at high speed. Well, so certainly one element. Recruitment and promotion processes that mitigate unconscious bias, and management that mitigate unconscious bias. I mean, it really just doesn't stop at recruitment. Gender targets at leadership level and action plans to achieve these. And finally, as a personal recommendation, personal education and support for women, all the women around you, whether you're man or woman, in their career progression. So lots to discuss today. And when I say you're in for a treat, I really mean it. Amazing speakers today. And over now to our amazing MC, the wonderful Róisín Ingle.
Well, you're all very welcome to WorkEqual's campaigns solution series, and I think, as Sonia said, this is going to be a really compelling conversation on the subject of how the value placed on caring contributes to gender equality at work. So we all know that the burden on women for caring duties, including childcare, but also family caring responsibilities, and it's an unjust burden. So we've loads to talk about, and hopefully we'll get to all of it today. The aspect, I have to say, that's concerning me the most, and without wanting to start on too depressing a note, but it's the fact that the UN and the World Economic Forum have both said that the pandemic is going to set women's equality back 50 years. And I suppose what that means is that this conversation we're having today is more urgent than ever. So I think that's something definitely to keep in mind. The fact that the pandemic is exposing and amplifying the inequalities that were there already between women and men. And so while in the pandemic, men are suffering higher mortality rates, women are being adversely affected by the economic and social fallout, because as we know, they're for the most part the unpaid caregivers in families and communities, and they're picking up the slack where schools, childcare or other services are scaled back. And women, unfortunately, are more likely than men to have to cut back on working hours in light of rising demands at home, whether it's for the old homeschooling that I know many of you have been doing, or housework, or caring for older relatives, or for those indeed with special needs. But it's not going to be all doom and gloom, because there is hopeful things to talk about as well. And I think anecdotally, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that many men are discovering the joys and the challenges of parenting and of caring a bit more than they may have experienced before, which hopefully will lead to a better understanding of that unfair burden which is placed on women. And it's a burden that sometimes I think women place on ourselves as well. I am endlessly fascinated by the dominance of women in my school and parenting WhatsApp groups and parents associations. And I'm in those spaces and I keep asking to myself, where are the men? And I'm also hearing sometimes when men do get involved in those WhatsApp groups that they're not necessarily welcome. So that's something that I think we need to think about and talk about. And another hopeful thing is an article I saw in the New York Times about New Zealand. Everything from New Zealand seems to be positive these days with the amazing Jacinda Ardern in charge. And in New Zealand, they have new legislation which is looking at how instead of equal pay for equal work, they're calling for equal pay for work of equal value, which is really radical. And it's going to lead to a massive debate on the real value of so-called women's work. So the New York Times report has said that New Zealand are asking us to consider whether a female-dominated occupation, such as a nursing home worker, is really different from a male-dominated one, when both of them are physically exhausting, emotionally demanding and stressful. And if they're not different, why is the nursing home worker paid so much less than a role in a male-dominated profession? And this new legislation says the pay scale for women should be determined by reference to what men would be paid to do the same work, abstracting from skills, responsibility, conditions and degrees of effort. So what they're trying to do in New Zealand is quite radical, and maybe it will catch on. Let's hope so anyway. Now, before I introduce you to the panel, and also just to say welcome to our special guests here. We've got members from the Oireachtas on the call, which is brilliant. It's great for you to be here. And I want to remind all of you in the audience that we want as much participation from you as possible. Your contributions are going to make this event really come alive. So do post your questions or your comments in the chat function, or indeed you can go on Twitter using the hashtag WorkEqual. I was very busy this morning getting the old hashtag up there behind me on the piano. And as the name of this series suggests, we're really focused, as Sonia said, on solutions. So we're interested in hearing the panelists and audience members' view on practical steps we can take to progress gender equality and the unfair burden on women. So we're going to bring you those questions as the session progresses, and also a reminder to all the attendees to keep your microphones on mute while the discussion is happening. So I am so delighted to introduce you to our outstanding panel today. As Sonia said, these are really impressive people that I know you're going to be really engaged by. Like most of our panelists, Professor Linda Scott has a long line of accomplishments, but to keep it short, I'll tell you she is the Emeritus DP World Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Oxford University and founder of the Global Business Coalition for Women's Economic Empowerment. And she also wrote the book on DoubleXEconomy, which is a consulting firm that advises all sorts of organizations on how better to include women in the world economy. Her book has been described as a rallying cry against blaming women for things that are not their fault. So you are really welcome today, Linda. Jed Kearney comes to us all the way from Melbourne, Australia, where she has served in the Australian Parliament as a federal Labour member since March 2018. She was the first woman to hold that seat. She's now the Shadow Assistant Minister for Skills and Aged Care. Jed started out as a nurse, became a top trade unionist and then an MP, but what she's done all along that path is continue to be a strong voice for social justice, universal healthcare and workers' rights. You're very welcome, Jed. I won't say good day, but I think I just did. And thanks for coming because it's very late there where you are. So we're really grateful to have you. And then on to Dr. Helen Russell, who is a research professor at ESRI, the Economic Social Research Institute, and her research is on themes such as equality, social inclusion, working conditions and quality of life. She has a long-standing interest in gender equality issues, and she was the lead author on the 2019 report on weight of care and unpaid work responsibilities. She's also a member of the Citizens Assembly on Gender Equality. So welcome to the panel, Helen. And finally, we are delighted to have Sean Cooke here on what is a very busy day for his organisation, the Men's Development Network. Some of you might be aware that it is actually International Men's Day today, and Sean is CEO of the network and their official spokesperson. He's over 30 years experience in the community and voluntary sector, and he's often asked by the government to represent men on advisory forums. So welcome, Sean, and happy International Men's Day to you. And also just to say, at the end of the event, we'll be coming to Professor Michelle Miller, who is academic advisor to the WorkEqual campaign, serving as conference rapporteur for these events. She's the co-author of the 2019 WorkEqual Conference Report, Practical Steps to Workplace Equality. Welcome, Michelle, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts later. Now, with all those introductions done, I'm going to go to each panelist for their take on the issue today. They're going to speak each for around 5 minutes on our topic of how the value placed on caring contributes to gender equality at work. So I'm going to come to Professor Linda Scott first. Tell us, Linda.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'd like to start this off with kind of a broad overview of the situation of women in the world economy. The definition of the double-X economy, which is the title of my book, is that it constitutes a world phenomenon in which women share the same set of restrictions all over the world in every country, rather than being different across the world. And I think that what we're seeing here right now is with the pandemic is the proof of that point. We see, for example, that women all over the world were hit early and hardest by the pandemic from an economic perspective because they were clustered in the same industries in every country, and they were all the most vulnerable to a contagious situation. I think what we're also seeing is the emergence of what is in every domain of the economy, as well as in every nation, the biggest barrier to women's economic participation, and that's the burden of care. And what we're also then, what's being demonstrated very strongly is that the burden of care is not a matter of free choice. We're constantly, I think, before the pandemic, told that, well, women don't get paid as much and they don't advance as much because they make the free choice to have children, and that means they have to stay home. Okay, and I think what we're seeing here is that that's not a free choice. Even if you think it is, it isn't, because the existing infrastructure, it's not just the cultural attitudes, which are important, but the existing infrastructure does not allow you another option, and that means it can't be a free choice. We all share, as part of the double-X economy, a history in which women were not allowed to work, were not allowed to control their own earnings when they did, were not allowed to hold wealth in their own name. If they had any wealth, their husbands could spend it however they wanted to. And the point of this was that it made women completely dependent on men everywhere, and it made them extremely economically vulnerable. And so when the UN and the World Economic Forum say we're in a situation where women might lose 50 years of progress, this is the progress we're talking about. It's the potential risk of falling back into utter dependency, and that would be very dangerous. So what we have in this situation is that we have this worst choice where we're threatened with the possibility of going back to this vulnerability. And in this situation, we also see that what women are doing is that rather than opening themselves up to that, and rather than wasting their preparation, their education, or whatever, what they're doing is that they're choosing consistently not to have children. And this indeed makes the national economy as vulnerable as it does when women are excluded from contributing to GDP, because fertility rates are inevitably connected to national viability. I think that going forward, talking about valuing this in the workplace, I think we'll talk, I'm sure today, about a lot of different ways of doing this. I think that going forward after the pandemic, what we need to be doing is some of what we're seeing a little bit of examples in places like New Zealand and Australia, but learning to value care such that we redesign our approach to its provision by calling childcare economic infrastructure. It's just like building an airport or a train station or a highway system. You have to look at childcare as economic infrastructure. And women now contribute on average just under 40% of global GDP. It is not sensible to continue ignoring the important contribution they make. One last thing I would like to offer here is that frequently what happens is that these conversations start focusing on paid leave, paid maternity leave. And this is an extremely important thing, and I would not at all disagree with that. In fact, it seems to me basic decency that people should be allowed parental leave. But it's a short term. In the life of a woman, it's a short-term issue. Children need care well after they are infants. In fact, I would argue when they're adolescents, they're even more trouble based on my own experience. And so this is not something that women should see as a long-term solution. The harder solution is going to be the provision of childcare. And it's the one thing that has been shown in research over and over again, that what will help women stay economically active is universal, high quality, affordable childcare. So that's my 2 bits.
Well, it's a brilliant 2 cents, Linda, and a great way to start off this. Thank you so much. I'm going to definitely ask you later on about how we make that shift from childcare to economic infrastructure, and it's almost like we have to change people's mindset. So we'll talk about that later. Jed, I want to come to you all the way in Australia now, late at night. You're very good, and I know you haven't had any wine yet, which is very restrained of you.
Oh, you're helping my liver today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be asked, and it's a wonderful conversation to be having on a global scale. And I think, Linda, you finished off on a really great point there about soft infrastructure or social infrastructure. Here in Australia, we are just waking up, or it seems to me that the whole world is starting to wake up to the economic value of what we call the care economy. I know it's slightly different to what you call the double-X economy, because I think you're talking about all types of women working in the economy in various ways. But here, when we talk about the care economy, we talk about those traditional female-dominated industries that are caring, you know, childcare, aged care, disability care, community care, healthcare, cleaning, that are low-paid, precarious jobs, and are often seen as not very attractive, and they're definitely not well paid. And however, what we know, and what suddenly all the researchers, not just social researchers, but economic researchers, are starting to do the sums. So they're starting to say, hey, you know, 50% of the workforce, like, not only do they vote, so there is actually some political advantage in looking after this cohort of people, but the work that they do is incredibly economically valuable. And it comes from, I think, the economic perspective that women participating in the workforce is good economics. But for women to participate in the workforce, they need services that are predominantly provided by women participating in the workforce. So they have this conundrum, really, which is, you know, it's not rocket science to work out how you fix it. But if we want women to participate in the workforce, then we have to invest in those services that women work in to participate in the workforce. So whenever we have these conversations, I'm always reminded of that beautiful song. It's Bread and Rose. I come from the trade union movement, and it's a song we sing all the time. You know, the rising of the women is the rising of us all. And it's absolutely true, you know, with all respects. And particularly, and finally, people are starting to realize that in the economic sense. So, you know, we always look for people who do it really, really well. We always look to the Nordic countries. They seem to do it all right. You know, you can't beat them in some ways, but, you know, they actually, and some European countries, of course, have got this working well. And in the Nordic countries, we see they have massive investment in the services sector. And all the indicators show that when women reach childbearing age, their participation rates actually stay flat. They don't drop. Whereas in countries like Australia, and I'm not sure, Linda, of the US, when women reach their childbearing ages, their workforce participation plummets. So you keep women in the workforce at those ages by providing proper services like childcare, aged care, all those ways, you know, the burden of care, lifting the burden of care from women so they can participate. And a lot of the economic studies that are coming out, not only in Australia, but worldwide now, are actually showing that the multiplier effect for every dollar invested in the care economy and in allowing women to participate is huge. And I'm sure you have touched on that in your many discussions on this, but for some reason it just seems to be bubbling up to the surface down here in the Antipodes now. You know, we've had the New Zealand case, as you said, and during the pandemic, and Linda touched on this, and I think you did too, Róisín, how women were adversely impacted. We're calling it the pink recession here, actually, in Australia, because, you know, women were twice as more likely to have lost their jobs, you know, far more affected by the pandemic here in Australia. The government, we have a Conservative government right now. I'm in opposition, the Labor Party. We have a Conservative government here, but they did see benefit in investing in free childcare for a short period of time during the pandemic. And it meant that the industry stayed open, the women who worked in the industry kept their jobs, and that women, essential workers who, you know, working in hospitals and the like, could actually go to work and have their children in childcare. This changed people's lives. Like, I had people ringing me and saying things like one wonderful woman rang me and she wanted to tell me that all her life, she was a single mum. She had 2 very young children. She'd been trying to set up her own business, but she just couldn't get there. She couldn't get the time and the effort and the energy. Free childcare meant her children could go full-time childcare, and she actually got her own little business up and running. She could sit down and work out the website. She could get the tax advice. She could actually sign all those forms and submit them that you have to start a business. And who'd have thunk that free childcare would make a woman economically independent? Duh, you know. So, you know, it really is revolutionary. But having a Conservative government, you might be surprised to know that the very first relief measure that they cut was free childcare. Gone. They cut it very early on, and they replaced it with a subsidy for people who were renovating their homes to get a government subsidy. So basically, wealthy people who had a spare $200,000 to add a new bathroom got a subsidy for that. Oh, this will put our tradies back to work. This will revitalise the construction sector. This will put squillions of dollars into the economy. Despite all of the research showing that if we had have invested in the care economy and women, the multiplier effects is much, much more. When our and building roads and bridges, and they're putting all this money. Somebody actually said to the Prime Minister, "Why are you doing that? Why aren't you investing in women?" And he said, "Well, women drive on roads, you know." Yeah, great. I think you've missed the point. So the Labor Party, I'm pleased to say, has really woken up to the great economic and social benefits of investing in the care economy. And we have produced just recently a fabulous childcare policy where we will subsidise childcare to 90% universally. We've seen it not as a welfare measure. It is actually important universal infrastructure that is important for everybody, and we know that the outcomes are very good. We're also investing in aged care, disability care. We're looking at changing the industrial relations laws here to limit casualisation, to limit 0 hours contracts, to actually raise minimum wages for women through our award structures here, tax incentives. So there's a lot of policy work going on to invest in the care economy, because we absolutely believe that that's where the benefits, not just socially for equality, etc., which is important, but also economically.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just a little bit of a snapshot from me. There's so much more to talk about, but
We'll get to some more of it, Jed, and maybe later on when we're finished, you might even sing a bit of Bread and Roses for us, because that sounds great. But I mean, I suppose Breda, I think, or Brenda has just said on the comments about the male dominance of politics. I don't know what the gender balance is in the Parliament in Australia, but I would assume that that might have something to do with the childcare thing being cut at the beginning.
The Labor Party has an affirmative action policy where 50% of women who are, we have to have 50% of women running for seats here. That doesn't mean all of the women get elected, but at the moment we have 50% of the Labor Parliamentary Party are women. And I can't tell you the difference it has made. The very first woman who was admitted to our cabinet structure years ago, this is 10 years ago or so, thanks to her, a wonderful woman by the name of Jenny Macklin, our country has paid parental leave, thanks to her. So that's the difference it makes, having a woman in the cabinet. And since then, you know, yes, it's really changed the viewpoint of the Labor Party here in Australia.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Jed. Really, really interesting again. And we're going to go to you, Helen, now, because you've done so much research in this area over many years. What's your overview on the subject we're discussing today?
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me today. I'm just going to, in my comments, just draw on some work that we did with colleagues in the ESRI and for the Irish Human Rights and Equality Authority on caring and unpaid work in Ireland a couple of years ago. I suppose the motivation behind that was maybe three things. So first of all, that there has been this revolution in the last 50 years in women's paid employment, but at the same time there hasn't been the same change in men's uptake of caring and other unpaid work. Secondly, that there's an abundance of evidence that these inequalities in caring play a big role in the gender pay gap and also in the pensions gap for older women. And also, I suppose, thirdly, is that care itself is really important for the welfare of society and for us as individuals. We all need care at different points in our lives, and but unlike paid work, which we measure all the time, we don't do the same for unpaid work, for caring and housework, and I think that contributes to it being you know, underestimated and undervalued. So it's trying to quantify it, I think, is an important step in itself to valuing it. So in terms of the key findings, we found that women spend almost twice as much time per week on care work compared to men, so about 21 hours compared to 11 hours for men. And that's mostly childcare, but it also includes adult care. And then we find the same pattern for housework. So this is not just about care work, but also housework. So women spending about twice as much time. And we also see that it's not just about differences in employment. So even where you compare men and women who do the same hours of paid work, there's still this inequality, the second shift, as it's been called. And the study that we used, it was European wide, and it was it's a survey that's done every 5 years, and we had. Every 4 years, I think, actually, and so we had a period of 11 years, 10, 11 years that we looked at, and there was no sign of any change in this inequality over that period. What was interesting from the international comparisons, I think, is that the gender inequality in unpaid work was pretty wide in Ireland. So if we had the whole EU 28, and we were the 7th highest gap between men and women. And it won't surprise any of you probably to hear that the countries where there was the narrowest difference were Sweden, Denmark, Finland, the Baltic countries. But even there, you know, the difference in the time spent on these tasks was about 7 hours per week, you know. So even in the nirvana of of Scandinavia, there is still inequalities there. So just moving to the solutions, I think we need, you know, policies that both support care needs and encourage men's take up of care and housework. So as the previous speakers have said, the greater provision of childcare, state-supported childcare. So in Ireland, there has been a good bit of policy development in this area in the last 10 years, but we were starting from a really low base, and there's still a lot of private provision. So the costs here are much higher than elsewhere in the EU. So secondly would be the parental leave. So especially for fathers. So again, there have been some developments. So there's now 2 weeks paid paternity leave, which only came in 2016. And then there's now another 2 weeks of paid parents leave, it's called, for fathers as well. But so we are talking 4 weeks. And the replacement rate, so the level of the payment is not very high. And what we know from other countries is where those benefits replace more of the earnings, that actually men are more likely to take them, to take those options. And actually involving fathers at that early stage can have a knock-on effect for later, you know, for the rest of it, because this is a really crucial point in people's lives where actually these sort of more traditional gender roles can become solidified where they weren't there before. Also flexible working hours, so that's or flexible work options more generally. So it doesn't have to be, you know, part-time versus everything else. It can be like flexible start and finish times, those are the things. Working from home. I mean, the pandemic may have had a bit of an unintended consequence here, is in that you know, such a big proportion of both men and women now working from home. So I think we do need to normalise flexible working amongst men, because otherwise, if we have all these options and it's only women doing them, then it won't become equal. Actually, it can make the pay gap and things wider if that's what happens. So I think that's really important, and we need to do finally, the sort of more informal culture also needs to be addressed. So these are kind of formal policies, but we need to be looking at long hours culture and showing that that's, you know, inconsistent with caring. And finally, sorry, I just did say finally twice, would be actually this whole thing of making unpaid work and care visible. You know, I think that's important in itself. So
Helen, thanks so much. I mean, the research is so important and so valuable in all of this. And thanks for mentioning men too there at the end, because we're going to bring Sean Cooke in, the CEO of the Men's Development Network, who's going to briefly tell us his overview. And happy International Men's Day again, Sean. Sean, are you there?
Yeah. Hello, how you just had to forget to unmute, it's normal.
Well, listen, we're all used to that. Sean, what are your thoughts at the end there, just for a couple of minutes now, and then
there's a certain element where I'm overwhelmed to a certain degree, but also, listen, I just want to say thank you very much for the invitation to all at WorkEqual. It's great to be part of today, and I think it's kind of apt among an International Men's Day that we have an opportunity where we are trying to kind of encourage people to celebrate the caring aspects of what it is to be a man in this time, and I think we certainly would see that in those caring roles, that it is the first step and one of the steps in where we start to kind of dismantle those gender inequality issues there, that issues in terms of stop us kind of bringing about a more gender equal society. So I think it's really important that we do get a chance to celebrate the kindness and the care and the love that men bring to their partners, their families, the community, and the society that they live in. So, and I think it's a critical area especially when we think back at the start of the pandemic. Like I was incredibly moved at the start of the pandemic, because I thought there was a shift in how our leadership, both our political leadership, and where the primary objective around the time was to care for each other. that, and the state were coming in and saying, we are going to care for you. Don't worry about the money for the moment. We will do this for you. And what happened was that everybody, the community, rode in behind it. They came on board. They saw the benefits that were happening around it. They saw the need for it, and everybody felt that they wanted to care, and everybody understood it was really important that they cared for each other. And when they put in a universal payment, the sky didn't fall in. You know, it didn't fall in. So there's a real case to be made around a universal payment in terms of work and non-work. You know, when we come down, or working from within the home, or unpaid care work, wherever it may be. I think the other thing that happened as well around the pandemic, for me, and I think these are critical things around the shift that needs to happen, the cultural shift that needs to happen around kind of gender equality, was that this value that was placed upon frontline workers and carers, everybody was looking to them, and people were standing outside in the streets and applauding them at 8 o'clock in the evening and doing wonderful things like that. Now, I think it was fantastic, and I embraced it, and I was involved in it, you know, but I think they prefer an extra €5 an hour. You know, I think that's the reality in terms of where, if we're talking about really valuing care work and people working in frontline services, and we know that they are predominantly women who are in that particular arena, you know, I think it's great to get the clap, and I think people really appreciate it, and I think it's a really good thing. But I think also there then needs to be a rethinking in relation to, if we do value, if we talk about this value, well, then we need to reflect it in how people are paid. I think that's a critical thing around that. I think as well, today has been really interesting for us, and we've been overwhelmed with stuff around International Men's Day when we talk about caring. And as I said, I do think it's a vital part of us trying to dismantle those social conditioning aspects that kind of prevent men from being in that caring space. And now I'm coming at this from an organization, we're a men's development organization. We have a strong social justice and equality perspective in relation to that, and it's underpinned by strong feminist perspectives, okay? And so when I talk about this, it's not about on fire booked or on bail booked. It's not the poor mouth for the man. It's basically saying that these are issues as well. There are certain parts of the patriarchy that do not work for men, and by that very essence, create a problem for women.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are a number of things like that. So, and those things are very much things like those critical things around how we as men get an opportunity, those social conditions that prevent us from being our most authentic selves. Mm. Okay, and so that they're kind of critical things for me that I like to kind of bring forward. And I'd like to give you an example just of something, because when people talk about social conditioning, you get people kind of eyes glaze over to a certain degree, and what do we really mean by that? Okay, well, I want to kind of give you two examples of it that really kind of reflect on how we need to kind of create the spaces for men to engage and to have that conversation. And one of them is in one that I saw a post this morning of a man talking about his father. He nominated his father in terms of the key qualities that he wanted to celebrate. And he talked about how this man, his father, had taught him how to speak from the heart. And I just thought it was an amazing kind of, and when he said it, I said, oh God, it just warmed my heart around what actually happens, you know. But he had that thing, he was able to say that, he was able to say it out loud, and he was able to celebrate it. And they're really important things when we try to encourage men to be in that place, because then that leaves them open and outside of those kind of social conditioning constructs and stereotypes that allows them then to engage with women as allies and supporters in terms of the quest for gender equality. So I think they're critical things for me. That's what I kind of wanted to bring today, yeah. Transforming masculinities and where we're at with that, and certainly looking at the whole issue of care. People want to care. Yeah, want to care.
Sean, I'm really glad you're in this session, because I think it's really important, and I think definitely, I'm sure Sonia agrees, and everyone on WorkEqual, if men aren't in the conversation, and if we're not talking about these things as parents, as carers, whatever the gender, then we're not going to make any progress. And I'm really gratified that seems to be happening a lot more in all these conversations. So it's brilliant to have you here, and happy International Men's Day to all of us. Listen, let's widen it out a little bit. We've got some questions coming in and we're running a tiny bit over. So I might come to you, Linda, because I really am fascinated by this challenge, which is trying to shift from the way we look at the way we value different work. And you mentioned childcare as one example, and how we might try to shift it to something to do with economic infrastructure. Could you talk a little bit more about that challenge and how you see that evolving? Or is it evolving? Is it too slow? Or do you see kind of positive news in that aspect, that people are seeing the economic benefit of these things? And will that be the way that we move forward?
Yeah, I think that the first step toward this economic infrastructure idea is to try to change the way our leadership thinks about the value of women in the workplace. I do think it's definitely true that we need to value care more. And I really appreciated Sean's comments, because I think that one of the hurtful things about a patriarchal system is the shunning of caring emotion and the provision of care for both men and women. And I think that's really important, but I also think that it will be a stronger argument, a more effective argument, if we point instead to the fact that, for example, throughout Europe, I'm sorry that I don't have right off the top of my head the numbers for Ireland, but I'm quite sure they're similar. You have pretty high levels of female labor force participation, and this is a primary driver of national prosperity, a primary driver. But a very high number of them, like 40%-ish, working part-time. And we know now that women choose to work part-time, or couples choose for women to work part-time because of the absence of affordable childcare. So if you provide that affordable childcare, it makes it possible for women to work full-time instead of part-time. And because that is a prime driver of growth in GDP, the government would immediately rake in taxes from it. Okay, I mean, this is a cash benefit here. Okay, and you can do the calculation, but it is significant enough to national prosperity that I argue that it could pay for itself, probably would pay for itself, but we don't even look at it that way. We're too fixed on it being, just kind of a handout, and really women should stay home anyway, right? We shouldn't have to pay them for something they should do for free. And that's just the wrong way to look at it.
Jen, I see you nodding away there. Do you want to come in on that point?
Thank you. We did, just on that last point, Linda, that it would pay for itself, we have done a lot of costing on childcare subsidies here, and the absolute bare minimum return is cost. So it would be net cost. So for every dollar you put in, you get $1 back. Other researchers have said, well, you actually get more than that. You can get 11% more again, or in other countries where they have subsidies across the whole care economy, it's worth up to $60 billion to some small economies. So you're absolutely right, Linda. The research we've done here is that it would be net cost, but in most cases would be a benefit economically.
And Jed, just staying with you, in Ireland, and I imagine Australia too, the caring professions that we're talking about are dominated by women, and that's just the reality. But, just thinking about Sean and what he was talking about, how do we get more men involved in these professions? For example, like my partner trained to be a Montessori teacher, but when he went to go to try and get a job, he definitely found the gender bias there, or that he was kind of looked on strangely because he would want to work in childcare. Does that still prevail, do you think, that attitude?
Absolutely. I mean, Sean might be better to answer this question being a bloke, but I think definitely it is still very much seen as women's work, and we are still very much, it starts in the family unit. We still very much have gender stereotyping from a very early age when they're raised. I think what we're finding though is that women are more prone to working now what once used to be male dominated areas. So women are moving out into law in Australia. Anyway, we have 50% of legal graduates are now women. Over 50% of medical graduates are women. So in those higher end white collar professions that used to be male dominated, women are moving in there because women have more choices. This is creating a shortage of nurses, a shortage of teachers, a shortage of carers because women have more options. And so I think bit by bit wages are rising because of demand, you know, particularly in nursing in my old profession. And we are seeing bit by bit men creeping in because wages are going up. There's a demand there. There's careers, you know, suddenly you're seeing the men moving in. So I think it has a lot to do with status, with how society views the work, with wages and conditions very much. And until we can get those professions up on a par with, like New Zealand has done with male equivalents, which we actually have laws in Australia to try to do that. It's just not working very well at the moment. I think that we'll struggle, but it might be interesting to hear Sean's view on that, being a man. I don't know. But.
Yeah, Sean, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think when I was thinking about the whole caring thing over the past couple of days before today, like one of the things that struck me, I've been in the caring profession since I left school. I was an early school leaver and I served my apprenticeship as a sheet metal worker. But then I went into the caring profession after that as a youth worker. I'm working in the youth work field in residential social care for the past 35 years. So I've been in the care game for a long period of time, and in some senses it hasn't been considered a care game. But it's youth work or community development work or whatever. And it's one of the interesting things about in terms of youth work is that I forget the actual figure now, but I remember when I was in the sector, I think it was something like 85% of youth workers were female. Who were actually in the sector, okay? But yeah, interesting enough, managers of youth services, it was 65% of them were men, even though there was such a short, small number. So, but I do think though that certainly that the social conditioning and the stereotypes are impacting upon the decisions men make around the work that they go into. There is no doubt about that. So certainly the solution around that, and we're talking about solutions, has to be around what we do around our own kitchen tables. What we do around our schools in terms of kind of introducing that notion around the kind of things of healthy relationships and healthy masculinities, and what does that mean and where does that work? And they need to be around those kind of spaces, you know, not just it happens in school and we don't just wait for them to come to transition year. You know, when we say now is your time to become aware of gender inequality, they've been aware of it since knee high to a grasshopper, you know. So I think that's where we have to start. And to start those conversations so that men and women can choose wherever work that they want to do, and that it would not be viewed in a way that is either it's a lower piece of work in which to do. Because we have seen it there over the past couple of months of how valuable this kind of work is.
Yeah, I want to start. Thanks so much, Sean. I want to go to some of the questions because we are moving on in time, and I want to get some of the questions in. And Helen, I thought this would be a good one for you. And actually, Jed and Linda, you might find this interesting. I don't know if you know that, as Rosemary has pointed out here in the comments, our constitution, Article 41.2, states that the state recognises woman gives to the state support without which the common good can be achieved, and the state will endeavour to ensure that mothers are not obliged by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. That's in our constitution. And Rosemary is just saying, if the law of the land says we value care, but the reality is different, what do we need to do to match that? Helen, I mean, we need to get rid of that out of the constitution for a start, don't we?
Yeah, so I mean that's obviously under discussion now, and I think it's I attended one of the committees in the Oireachtas about it, and you know, so getting rid of it as it is, there's unanimous agreement on that because it's framed in a very sexist, gendered way. But I suppose there are a lot of organisations like the National Women's Council and others have said, right, we shouldn't get rid of it entirely, that actually what we should do is substitute it with something more gender neutral that values caring. So I suppose that's where the debate is on the constitutional piece itself. I just in terms of the what you were talking about there before with Sean, there's really interesting research on discrimination, when they try and look at discrimination in recruitment, and actually where they send matched CVs and just change the gender or whatever, and the discrimination against men in terms of recruitment for female dominated jobs seems to come out even stronger. So that gender norm of men not going into female typed roles is actually stronger than the other way around in those experiments.
No, that's very, actually, I mean, does anyone have thoughts on what I mentioned earlier about the parent-teacher sort of WhatsApp groups? I don't know if Linda, you have experienced that, where that's something that as mothers, we're supposed to be the ones that organise all the things with school and what goes on, and the dads don't have to be a part of it. And sometimes when they do get in there, they're kind of seen as a bit weird. Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I think that is so very true. And one of the big pressures I think that mothers experience is that it's not just that they provide the care, they have to organize everything, and they're responsible. The responsibility weighs very heavily. And I have observed it myself that my son-in-law is the primary carer for my grandchild, and he does a beautiful job. But yeah, people expect that that's not somehow okay, or they overly praise him for doing what the other women are doing, right? What the women are doing. I think I would like to just volunteer here a little sort of fact bit. In my book, one of the things that I did was to go through every stupid myth that has ever been put forward to justify women's subordination. And one of them is this business about women being natural mothers, and that it's natural for them to withdraw from the workplace to take care of their children and all this kind of thing. This is not natural. I mean, I really went deep on this, on the science on this. This is not natural. What is natural to humans, actually, humans are what's called an allomothering species. It means shared care. Humans, one of our niftiest evolutionary advantages has been that we are an animal who shares care among women, but also with men. Another of our distinctly positive evolutionary advantages is that human males are equally able to care for children as are the females. Yeah, I mean, this is like major. And so what we're doing is as a species, we're shooting ourselves in the foot for what really is an ideology. This is not a fact. There's no factual basis for all these underlying assumptions that underpin these actions we're talking about and these issues. So just had to put that in there. You guys, go out there and tell people it ain't natural. It just isn't.
Thank you so much. Cheering. Sean, come in there.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. Because I think, it's a fundamental issue, isn't it, around where we sit as kind of partners in rearing children and what we do around it, and the societal structures that are in place, of barriers against allowing women to go to work and allowing men to become the primary carer are there, and we need to kind of find ways in which to dismantle them. And I think for us in terms of the Mental Development Network, the key part of that is about giving the opportunity for men to find themselves in those spaces, express it, and become allies to women in moving forward around addressing the gender influence. So I think that's fantastic, Linda. Glad to, it warms my heart when I hear that.
Yeah, it's great to have the science behind it, Linda. Thank you very much. I'll be definitely quoting that. And just because we are talking about solutions, for me in those WhatsApp groups, I did send a private message to the person who was organizing it saying, could we get more men in? But again, I was very shy to say it out loud because I felt like I might look like some kind of annoying person. So I think we have to kind of be brave and courageous when we see ththese things and call them out and find a way to say it that doesn't make us sound like we're hectoring or nagging or something like that. But I think we have to say it if we see it. Otherwise, we're complicit in a way. We're allowing it to continue. I really want to get Dee's question in here because it's a really good one. Dee has said that she delivered a 2-hour lecture this morning on gender. It raised a lot of discussion and debate. Many of the females in the group feel so fearful for their future. They don't seem to see how it will be possible to preserve their spot in the workforce once they start families. They already feel like they'll have to choose one over the other. And Linda, you touched on this earlier, saying that some women are just simply not having children because of it. So Jed, would you like to come in on that? I mean, that fear and that very real problem that people are experiencing at the moment, wondering will they have to choose?
Yeah, I think that is very real. Absolutely. I just look at my own daughters, you know, they're going through that themselves. And I remember I had my babies very young, you know, these days. I was only 23 when I had my twin girls, and I, because of financial situation, had to go back full time to work, shift work as a nurse. I still call it my dark hours, because if the kids were sick, I was the one that had to leave work and go home and pick the kids up from childcare. I was the one that had to spend my lunchtime rushing to take them from kindergarten, which is only half a day, to the carer in her home. I was the one that was just frantic running around, whereas my husband, their father, kind of, you know, there was no expectation whatsoever on him. So it's not only a fear, I think it's a reality that juggling all of that is, I understand that worry, I really do. And we've all lived it, haven't we? I think every woman here has lived that.
Yeah, I think time is going on, and I do want to come to Michelle Miller for her takeaway as well before we go. And also, I have to say, I'm going to rush off and read your book, Linda, The DoubleXEconomy, and I think we should all read it and study it. And I know Sonia's a big fan of it already, so we should all get on that train. Michelle, can you tell us what your takeaway is from today, and something that struck you about the conversation? There's been so much in it. I've really enjoyed it, I have to say.
Absolutely, Róisín, and thank you for your emceeing. It's been great keeping us all going. And to the speakers, I mean, one of the things, I'm sure those of you who've been with us since the start, I'm really beginning to see connections across all our sessions, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But I mean, I think the thing that you know, Linda, I suppose, is really giving us permission as women to say globally we contribute 40% to the GDP globally. Childcare is an economic infrastructure, just as is the Lewis going to work, you know, if you want us to continue to contribute. And again, you know, the importance of all of that. And I think Jed then goes back to something we've been talking about time and time again, is about women being at the table, the policy making table. And it's great to see, you know, the affirmative action in the Labour Party in Australia, and then that translating into policy, because really, you know, we need the policy infrastructure, but there's the cultural infrastructure as well. Helen, I'm a big fan of Helen's work and her reports, and so disappointing to see that there hasn't been a shift in the gap between the two periods of the study that in terms of looking at unpaid and care work. And it really does give pause for thought. But again, the importance of solutions, and back to flexible employment and parental leave, which again, we've had a lot of discussion around here, and the importance of what we heard of recently in terms of Iceland, that with maternity leave it's going to be split in two, and the importance of men coming on in that caring role very, very early on in the child's life. To Sean, happy International Men's Day. And again, Sean, for a lot of what you talked brought us back to our first session in terms of gender stereotyping. And what really struck me again in terms of social conditioning and what is our roles as men and women around caring. And it struck me, what do we do with the kitchen table, Sean, as you said, in terms of what I never take out the bins, for example. That's Podge's job. You know, what lessons am I teaching my now adult children? But for all of us, our children, our nieces, our nephews, those that we interact with, what does care look like? And who does what elements of care within the home? What message are we teaching? So that whole gender stereotyping. But look, great, fantastic, absolutely great to be part of it. Thanks, Róisín.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And yes, Nina has just asked, are all these sessions being recorded, because she says it's fantastic, and I think we can all agree that it has been. And yeah, and you can follow the hashtag as well, WorkEqual, on Twitter as well. And just Dee Duffy has also said that RGB have had a great response to the issue of dividing the expected care of school-going children. When she had one too many phone calls from the school teacher, she kindly asked the teacher, rotated her phone calls between Ruth and the child's father, and she noticed that the teacher was less inclined to call on them so often when the father was going to be discommoded. So it just shows you, it really is an endlessly fascinating subject. Thank you all very much. We've come to the end of what I think was a brilliant session. It's kind of given me lots of life and enthusiasm, I have to say. These subjects are so important. Sean, I think your contribution has been really important too. And again, happy International Men's Day. We can't say it enough to you, because you know, on Women's Day, men are always going, when's Men's Day? Well, it's today. You can tell them all.
It's today.
Thank you so much, everyone. You've been absolutely brilliant. Thanks to Linda Scott, to Jed Kearney, Helen Russell, and as I said, Sean Cooke, and I have to say a big thank you to all the WorkEqual team as well for putting these brilliant sessions together. And I can see from all the comments how much people get out of them. Thanks to Sonia Lennon for being such a powerhouse. I love that picture of you earlier, Sonia, with your hand in the air. It's fantastic. And most importantly, thanks to all of you audience for being here and being so engaged with the topic. And don't forget, there's still one event left in this series of panel discussions that have taken place this November. The last event will take place Thursday, 26th of November, and will explore the theme of women's underrepresentation in positions of leadership. You can register to find out more about the campaign at workequal.ie. And finally, a huge thanks to the campaign sponsors, Solus and Permanent TSB. And that's it from us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.